Welcome to Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I focus in on helping companies increase capacity and provide the needed clarity in their strategy, people, process, and technology. And a lot of the times I focus on businesses that cut across life sciences from pharma through biotech and medical device. And so, I would definitely love to hear from anybody who currently is struggling with any of those areas. And so with that, I'm going to jump into our interview for today. In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Meredith Manuel. Miss Manuel is a proven leader with drive, determination, and also works in the scientific industry, specializing in global drug development and project management. So with that, welcome, Meredith.
Thank you, Don. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So would you just take a moment and tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the scientific space for my whole career, but honestly, it really started. I remember being in kindergarten and being fascinated with science. Asked for chemistry kits in first grade, and being in kindergarten, we had career day, and there was a veterinarian there, and I just, kind of fell in love with it, and over time continued to be that focused in that area and have grown that over time and been very fortunate in my career to get to work kind of across the span in the drug development space and very passionate about it.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting space with a lot going on. I feel like there are just so many aspects and areas of what I call life sciences, right? Cutting across that pharma and biotech space. And then also, same in medical device. I feel like they have some of the same exact challenges, right? You have AI coming. There's a lot of new technologies that are coming. And it just adds a lot of, great things that are happening overall inside of the industry, I feel like.
No, definitely. And, the area that I work in right now, particularly spatial biology, I feel like is one of kind of the new cutting edge technologies that a lot of people have heard about. Maybe not a lot of people necessarily know or figured it out yet. But I can say for me personally, what I'm doing now at Enable is managing the commercial division of a company that is very focused in spatial biology. And with that, we have obviously there's the typical sales and marketing, but we're also doing wet lab generating images of 50 to 100 markers on the same slide, which obviously are things that 5 or 6 years ago we couldn't really do or we couldn't do well. And I think more importantly is taking some of those types of assays and integrating them with transcriptomics, genomics data sets in that spatial context to really understand what's going on in some of these challenging diseases, oncology, immunology in particular. Um, and what I see in the industry is that this is going to grow and continue. The single biomarker paradigm that we've used for a very long time, I don't believe is the best way to approach things. And while that's all we had, I'm finding the industry is really thirsty for a lot of this knowledge, and they want to understand, and they realize they need to understand, much more than is this PD-L1 positive. It's what's going on in the microenvironment, what's going on, kind of in the immune environment, and how is that impacting the tumor, the disease's ability to take hold and grow.
Yeah, I feel like that idea of having, an understanding more broadly of exactly what's happening is just so important. Not just not just right now, but I feel like it's always been important. It's just been, a struggle to try and get that information. I feel like we're at the right point now to start, gleaning some insights.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And honestly, that's how I ended up at Enable Medicine. A friend of mine mentioned them to me. I went to their website. I actually got a demo of their software and what they've been able to do as far as generating insights. And I was hooked. It was something that, as a scientist on the scientist side, working in drug development for almost 30 years, we've always had these conversations, and then the genomics came along and you were generating these huge data sets that then sat on shelves because nobody could figure out the best way to analyze them or to make sense of them in ways that were meaningful in the context of the patient or the development process. And I think that's what really excites me about Enable and being here is that, we're on the cutting edge of figuring out how do we take all of these very large, very disparate data sets and break them down into something that tells you, what's your mechanism of action? Why am I having adverse effects? What are the best patients to put my drug in to then lead you down the path of a much higher increase of success of getting that drug approved. I mean, it's sad in a way to think about, the percentage of drugs that move through this process and don't get approved and, aren't able to help people because of the current paradigm. And, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely am hearing a lot more work being done to also, help hopefully improve that as well, right? So we certainly don't need all of the stage 3 clinical trials that we have today that currently fail to continue. I mean, obviously, we'd love to see all of that improve as well. In terms of your role, so whenever I read your title, it's head of business services, and whenever I think of that, I remember thinking to myself, what specifically is this? And I think you touched on it just a little bit ago. I just wanted to, just sort of explore a little bit more, on a day-to-day basis, what do you have responsibility for at Enable?
No, that's a good question. And the title is a little bit ambiguous. When I started at Enable, it was specifically around sales and marketing and trying to get this knowledge out into the marketplace, get people to know that there is a group out there that can help you and start to kind of increase awareness of spatial biology and obviously Enable itself. But over time, that's changed to wet lab services as well as analysis, as well as the team that actually takes all of the data that not just we generate, but that our clients have maybe generated in-house or with other vendors to combine all of that into a cohesive data set and then be able to slice that data in different ways to understand things in a much more comprehensive way to, again, to increase those chances of success. And for me, that's very exciting. And, I get to be involved in every step of the process, having done all these things at, other organizations in the past. I'm in the process of building out this commercial team that's really designed to go out there into the market and ideally help some of these companies get their drugs to market that, maybe wouldn't have just last year.
Oh, very nice. And then maybe we take a little bit of a step backwards for, in the conversation. What is spatial biology?
That's a great question. And I do get asked that a lot. I mean, functionally, at a very high level, spatial biology is just looking at markers and molecules in the context of the tissue. So, like genomics historically is, like you think about like a bulk sequencing thing where you're grinding something up and or looking at, a flow data set and it tells you what's in there, but not where, not in a neighborhood perspective, not, for example, how close are your CD8 positive T cells to your CD45 positive T cells. And by doing that, what that allows you to do is to then break that down into even more detailed neighborhoods. For example, cellular neighborhoods. So you can say, these are T cells, these are NK positive cells, and how are these different cells interacting with your disease, whether it's tumor, whether it's psoriasis, anything immunology related that you can get a tissue sample from, and understand those things in context. And it doesn't just have to be protein. We've got RNA, we've got, transcriptomic data that we can do that with. And again, starting to layer all those different data sets together is so powerful because then it gives you the ability to say, to look at different cohorts, for example, responders and non-responders. You've run a clinical trial, phase 1, you collect some of this data, you break it down, and then you are able to, at a very minute level of detail, say the reason this group is responding versus this group may be a particular neighborhood of cell, not just a single biomarker, but neighborhoods and the way cells interact with each other. And that's what spatial biology does. It allows you to understand in that context, almost like, for example, a neighborhood where you live. How close are you to your neighbor? And you like this neighbor next to you, but the one across the street you don't like, and what kind of impact does that have on your relationship or your ability to function? That's basically what spatial biology is.
Yeah, that's why I always pull my car around the back. For anybody that actually knows where I live, I don't really have a backyard, but whatever. It fit the joke for that moment. So, so let's talk a little bit about Enable Medicine. The at Enable, what are your products and what is it that you actually offer?
Sure. So Enable Medicine's actually only been around about 4 years, but it started from someone out of Stanford who, like a lot of us, were very frustrated with how long it was taking to analyze these very large data sets and get answers that they wanted to be able to move forward. So our CSO and our CEO founded the company based on that. And the idea is not just to help pharma, but really to, at a very high level, at a very altruistic level, to help scientists understand disease better so that we can make better judgments, to make better drugs, to understand things in a more meaningful way. So they started building this software platform, and it's similar to some other software platforms in that we have a visualizer and we can segment cells. And for those of you that understand image analysis, there's a certain number of steps involved. But what they did then is really take that to the next level and make it incredibly user friendly. The software itself has apps kind of like you would have on your phone. You can say, click, I want to segment cells, and you can change parameters. You can, look at things in a different way. But more importantly, I think, at the end of that process, what the software does is take all that data and allow you to look at it in ways that actually mean something ultimately to the science. So you've done segmentation, you've done QC, you've done some neighborhood analysis, and now you can say, okay, well, I want to understand my responders or non-responders, or you can slice the data in any type of way in which you've uploaded that metadata. So, for example, were they smokers? How old were they? Sex, previous treatments, anything like that. It allows you to then slice the data and look at the difference in those two different parameters. It's very flexible. It's very easy to use. And again, it allows you to really drive meaningful insights. So let's say you find a neighborhood that's particularly different in two groups that you're looking at. Then you dig deeper into that particular neighborhood instead of wasting a lot of time looking at, shelves and shelves of data. You've now identified maybe what that key piece of information is. And so you can kind of go down that road and focus, but the data is always there, so you can go back and figure it out. We have a lot of academic people that are using the platform now. We actually provide it for free for academic groups to use because, again, like we think it's very important that scientists in that stage have the ability to understand what is going on in the context of their research. And a lot of these academic groups are even running clinical trials. And on the commercial side, we have an entire team of scientists, biologists, computational immunologists that understand not just the science part, but also the coding part. And they can go into the back end of the software and answer very complex questions for people.
Very interesting. We were talking a little bit before we got on, and it sort of spurred an additional question I'd love to know as well is, how do you see the overall market for spatial biology evolving over the next few years? Because, I just look at all the different technologies that are, you could say somewhat on the shelf currently, for different, different businesses to try and leverage. And, I see spatial biology as potentially being one that, could greatly benefit from a lot of the things that are coming out. And yeah, I just would love to hear your thoughts in terms of, how you feel like things are going to evolve.
Now that's a good question, and I definitely have a lot of opinions on it. We'll see what happens in the next few years. But the way that I look at it is, like I said, what we're doing now in our wet lab is staining samples with somewhere between 50 and 100 markers at a time on the protein side, which is a huge amount. Again, for those listeners who are familiar with IHC, this. But again, the standard has been 1, 2, 3 markers, maybe at the most 6. And what that allows you to do then is, kind of going back to what I had mentioned earlier, is it allows you to understand in a minute detail what cells sit where, but not just from, like this cell has this marker positivity, but with all of those different biomarkers, you can phenotype them down into very specific subsets of cells and understand how they're interacting with each other. And I think this also leads back to what I was talking about with the software. What I envision is utilizing a lot of this very high plex technology, whether it's protein combined with, things like genomics and transcriptomics, to then distill down where those key areas is that are making the impact for your drug, your pathway, or whatever it is that you're evaluating. So then as you move forward in the process, maybe by the time you hit the middle of phase 2, you'd say, okay, I've identified these 5 or 6 biomarkers that consistently have shown to be the areas that are impacting my ability to have a response versus a non-response, which is ultimately what we're trying to drive at in the drug development space. So then you distill down all of that information into, a 4 to 6 plex panel, which is obviously a lot more manageable, budget-wise and processing-wise. And then you move that into your later phases, but then it allows you to make much better decisions about which patients you're actually going to enroll on your trial to increase your chances of success. And it's not just a financial thing, Don. I mean, I can talk all day about, why I love what I do. But this allows the right drugs to get to the right patients so much easier.
Yeah.
And that's kind of
So
what I
important.
think, ultimately we're going to do from a spatial biology perspective in the next few years.
So important as well. What is the greatest leadership advice you ever received?
I feel like that question is a little bit dependent on your background, right? And for me, being a woman in the scientific space, one of the great things Enable has done is we have a women in STEM group, and so all the kind of up and coming females in the space get to learn from people. We have speakers, and for me, it was the same. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, and when I started, there were not a lot of women leaders in the space. And early in my career, I think about 10 years in, I had a female boss, and we would talk a lot. And one of the things she told me is, be your own advocate. Don't let your voice get lost in kind of, the shuffle of everything else. And it sounds really simple. But I think for some of us, it's a challenge. And I think for me, it certainly earlier in my career was. I don't think people would say it is now for sure. But, it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, and began to kind of structure the way that not just I thought about things, but the way that I interacted with my peers, or even people higher up in the organization, and it's really helped me to get where I am today. It certainly was a learning process, but yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most impactful things that I was told, even though it seems fairly trivial.
Yeah, I don't think it's trivial at all, because I think there are people that do this very well, right? They sort of highlight and spotlight their own work extremely well. I feel like they um, spend sometimes an inordinate amount of time sort of thinking about it. And then there are people that do it so well that while they're doing it, you don't even know that that's what they're doing. And then you sort of reflect back. And I remember I had in my career. I've had several leaders under me that have teams of people, and I had two very early in career leaders that were both female. They were trying to figure out the same sort of thing was a struggle for them, and one approached it one way, and one approached it a different way, and and I was impressed with sort of the different approaches, and you could definitely see how they were almost competing against each other at times. And all I kept thinking was, imagine if they could be an amplifier for each other instead of thinking of it as like a competition where you're trying to level the field. That's not the goal. The goal is, if sometimes whenever you sort of, increase the water level for everybody, all boats will rise in that tide. And so, I think there's a real important lesson for people, female or not, in terms of the way that you sort of think about highlighting your career and spotlighting the things that you're doing, but also not always doing it at the expense of others. And I think it's a really important lesson, because I do think, especially in the hybrid work environment that we work in now, how would people know that you've done things unless at times you're taking the moment to say, hey, look, these are some of the things that I've done as well. So I mean, I do think it's an important leadership lesson to highlight for everybody.
No, I think that's great, and I'm glad that you told that story. I mean, I've told similar stories and helped mentor younger people, and that is part of the discussion you have, right? I mean, the rising water, brings all the boats up, and that's so important. Not just across the board, but certainly, if you think about minorities in the space, and helping, anywhere you can. And one of the things that I do like about our internal group is that everybody's welcome to come. So, I gave a presentation a few weeks ago about kind of my experience, and it's not just the women in the company. The young men come too, and they want to hear and they want to understand, and doing that helps everybody as well, right? So they hear these stories, and then that maybe more thoughtful about the way that they interact with people. And I think it's critical that we continue to teach, the next generation, and on and on.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think. I mean, because to me, DE and I um, is not just about this idea of sort of getting people together or anything related to just like having meetings and giving presentations. Like you're saying, it's fundamental from the standpoint of it having a broad, diverse group helps everybody share ideas. and realistically, you think about, especially, where we work, in this industry, it's important to have people who are willing to share ideas and step up and, contribute even whenever it's uncomfortable. And,
No,
I
I
think,
agree.
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say I agree 100%, and that's, as a leader who's been a leader of leaders and huge groups of people, one of the first things I tell my managers and the rest of the team is, you guys understand what you're doing better than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Your boots on the ground, you're doing it every day, you're kind of in the trenches. And so I might have ideas about ways to improve, but you guys have the best ideas, because you're the ones that every day struggle and maybe complain to the person next to you. And, what I find is a lot of, the lower level techs or managers are almost afraid to bring
Mm-hmm.
some of the challenges up. And I'm the opposite. I want to hear what you're struggling with. I want to hear your ideas on how to fix them. If you come to me and you have a challenge, one of the first things I ask is, well, how do you think we should fix it? And I think that that's important to, again, build some of those things that you were talking about. And I think that's important as leaders that we encourage our teams to not do what we tell them to do, but to think, innovatively, and outside the box. Because again, everybody's background is different. Do I have lots of good ideas? Yeah, sure. But so do you, and so does everybody else. And, that doesn't mean that mine is better. And that's helped, I think, a lot over the course of my career, is just being able to sit down with groups of people who felt comfortable enough to be open enough to provide some of these things.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I also believe that I I think a way to get teams to collaborate that way that are quiet. I always the one sort of idea that I oftentimes have shared with other leaders is you can use escape rooms to your advantage. And if you sort of handcuffed a team and you said, "Hey, look, we're going to go in this escape room, and only these people are allowed to do math. Only these people are allowed to spot things, and only these people are allowed to, help sort of." Listen to the messages that are coming along the way, because I mean every escape room has each one of those components in it. um, you quickly will figure out how just limited you are. I mean, if everybody sort of stays in their box, it's the same exact thing that happens. I feel like in escape rooms, if people are handcuffed in terms of the things that they can do, if everybody's allowed to be observant, to do some of the math problems that will come up, and then also overall contribute in terms of listening for the other signals that are coming into the escape room. I feel like it's a great way to sort of illustrate what we constantly see in meetings, which is people will arrive and then they'll look at their phones and handcuff themselves, to what's either coming in an email versus what's in the meeting. And I just feel like there's a real opportunity for teams to understand that whenever it's time to show up, you really need to show up, and all of you.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy, and I think I might steal that one. But the phone thing is actually a good thing too. I mean, I know one of the things that I do at home with my kids is no phones at the dinner table. And there have been times at work where I've said the same thing. All right, guys, we're all going to put our phones in the middle and focus on trying to solve this problem. And that means everybody. Even if it's not your area, if you have an idea, you know, let us know. It might be the thing that changes the problem, that fixes what we're trying to solve. So I agree 100%.
So important. And I mean, thank you so much for sharing with me as well. The leadership advice that you got as well. There are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
What inspires me? Like I said, I've been very interested in science since I was young. Definitely what you would have called a nerd, before when I was younger. But what I've also found is it personally has impacted me a number of times, cancer in particular. I have a lot of members of my family and very close friends that have either gone through it or died from it. And I want to fix that. I mean, I think the system is okay, but I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. And I want to be a part of that. I mean, I think it's exciting to be able to work on some of these things that are cutting edge and developed. And I can give you names of drugs that I've actually worked on that have helped people. And for me, that's why I get out of bed every day. It's not about making another sale or fixing another thing in the lab or bringing in a new piece of equipment. It's knowing at the end of that process that there are actually people, parents and children and just across the board, real people out there that we're helping.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And watching patients, closely as well, just overall can drive a lot of us to the point of saying, we've got to find a way. We need to find a way to help, and and for a lot of us, this is the way that we find as well. I wanted to just highlight as well. So Thomas Forsfarb Horsch is the CEO of Thrive Bio. He's watching us as well. I don't know how well I can highlight this. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can. Um, it's always fun whenever I get to try and do these things live, but I will try my best for everybody so that you could see the question. Um, but I mean, primarily, he's asking. It would be interesting to hear some of the use cases that you see as well from your side of the with the what you're doing currently with Enable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we have very specific case studies around some of the things we've been able to do in just the last year. I had a large pharma company that was working in the immunology space, and they were seeing some adverse events, which are not unusual, some sort of skin rashes and reactions. And before they moved on from their phase 1 trial, they really wanted to understand why this was happening. What's driving this? What can we do differently? And so we did some of the things that we've talked about earlier. Is we did very high plex protein analysis. We looked at what's the difference between the people who were having adverse events versus not. And we're able to identify different cell types and neighborhoods that were actually driving that difference. And so what that allows you to do, in a good way, is to then select patients based on those different parameters. I think one of the things that we may have to fight a little harder for from an industry perspective is the fact that it means that you'll be dosing ultimately with less patients. So pharma is going to make less money, but it means that you're going to help more people. And so I think getting over that hump, honestly, is going to be one of the biggest challenges, but it does enable us to do that.
Hmm.
And the same thing for example, indication expansion. That's huge in this space, right? You get a drug approved, and let's say it's approved for non-small cell. Are there other indications where you can see just as much benefit? And again, going back to understand the tumor microenvironment from patients that have been treated versus untreated then allows you to stratify those patients in a way that's much more meaningful and drives much more impactful results. So, again, maybe less patients are getting treated up front, but instead of a 20% response rate, maybe you're getting a 60% response rate, which in some of these indications, oncology and rare disease, is unheard of. I mean, how exciting is that to be able to think about getting to that point? I
Right.
mean, for me, it's exciting. So, and those are the things that, me and my science team work on every day is, how can we help you get to that point? What are the problems that you're having? How can we help you find those better patients?
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. The next question I had was, what concerns you?
Yeah, I just alluded to this. I mean, ultimately the FDA is the one in control of what data you have to provide and what gets approved versus what doesn't. And I think the one thing that does concern me is pharma has such a big impact on those regulations. And, I don't want this to not continue to progress because pharma companies are concerned about losing money.
Mm.
While it's a valid concern and everybody needs to stay in business, I think we should all start to focus much more on the patient, and the outcomes rather than, if I dose 100 people and only 20% respond, hey, that's good enough for me and I made all this money. And then that concerns me. I think we all have to be advocates in the industry to say, this is a better way to do this and this is why.
Yeah, very good. And then last question, what excites you?
Being on the cutting edge. I mean, the things that we're doing now are things that people have literally never done before. Some of the things that we're able to do now are things that, 5 years ago, I remember being in a room talking to some of my colleagues and pathologists and saying, I wish we could integrate all these data sets to understand things better. I wish we could look at more markers on the same slide. Um, and being a part of this very rapidly evolving field for me is super exciting. Just being kind of in the trenches and trying to find better ways to drive the science, and not just the well lab side, but those insights. The data is great, like we talked about before, but if you can't understand it, it's not helping anybody. So, again, being able to kind of cross over on both sides and say, we're generating this huge amounts of data, but then we're also able to dig into it and provide really meaningful insights that will ultimately help people, individual people, in very meaningful ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the more that you hear about the tools that are being developed that allow us to understand things from a systems perspective, I just more or less thought of it that way. But from a systems perspective, you kind of think about, from the microbiome all the way through to the cells that, maybe for whatever reason they're not behaving themselves, and so. I just think the more we can understand these environments, the better we will be in terms of the things that we can develop. And so, Meredith, I wanted to thank you for being here and sharing with me all the insights about what you're working on. And I definitely look forward to seeing and hearing more.
Well, thank you so much, Don. This was great. And, I could talk about what I do all day. I love it. So I appreciate the time.
All right, thanks a lot.